So what we have here is basically just a colossal waste of everyone's time. This was GM intentionally running down the clock on a game that they knew they were losing. This is a Saturn L200 2002. And if you want the clearest picture, I think, of the dysfunction that this thing represents and the incompetence that it represents, you don't have to look any further than the name they slapped on the back of it. When this thing came out in the year 2000, this car that you're looking at, this mid-size sedan body car right here, slash wagon, it came as a wagon too, but this car, this particular car, this Saturn item, carried the model name of either LS, LS1, LS2, LW1, or LW2. Yeah, those weren't the trim names like LESE, whatever. Those were the model names, right? So unlike a Honda Accord, where if you wanted to say you have a Honda Accord, you just say, I have a Honda Accord, or a Toyota Camry, same thing. This, but depending on what the options were and whether it was a sedan, what engine it came with, it had like 5 different like series of numbers and letters, and all of this obscure, weird, esoteric bullshit, pardon my French, was basically just kind of a gimmicky attempt to make this thing seem more sophisticated in German, right? It's kind of like Elon Musk and the way he names his kids, I guess. So that was when this thing came out in the year 2000, right? This car was, this is an 02, this was released in the year 2000. And it came out, with, like I said, those were the 5 model names. I'm not going to repeat them because I don't have that much air left in my lungs. But then the next year after that, and I also have to save up. So then the next year, 2001, they fired the genius who came up with that naming series, and they hired yet a new genius. And he came up with even more numbers and letters in it because more is always better. So in 2001, they renamed this car from LS, LS1, LS2, LW1, or LW2 to L100, L200, which is what this one is, L300, LW200, and LW300. So this is a Saturn L200. And then this particular genius must have been an even bigger genius than the first guy because his incredibly creative Rolodex of names for this single lackluster car lasted an entire 3 model years rather than just the one. But alas, in 2004, yet another genius was hired, and his keen senses told him that the car had too many names, so he endeavored to reduce the number of names by creating a series of new names, and so this car was renamed yet again to L300.1, L300.2, or L300.3. Anyways, that didn't last long either, because a year after that, they quit making these entirely, not sure why, actually I'm pretty sure why, fired all 3 of the geniuses, and legend has it they're all retired now on their own private islands in the Caribbean, which incidentally are named IS, IS1, and IS2, I-100, I-200, and I-300, or I-300.1, I-300.2, and I-300.3, depending on whether your tax haven is structured in Delaware, the Grand Cayman Island, or the Swiss Alps. But I have it on good authority that they wish the best of luck to any remaining owners of these cars, whatever you call them, because as if finding parts, information, and support for a series of low sales volume quasi-foreign sedans from a discontinued car brand wasn't hard enough, the fact that this thing went by 17 different names doesn't help. Did I mention this company went bankrupt? Plot twist, right? Christ, Saturn. They were owned by General Motors, obviously. Somebody asked me the other day, whatever happened to Saturn? And it's like, well, when they first came out, they sold one car. It was totally original. It was made from scratch. It was actually pretty decent. The car was decent. The car itself was decent. It was okay. But the further you zoom out, the more obvious it is what a fool's errand Saturn ever was. General Motors created its own completely independent company within its company. And rather than make a new small car through its existing company and let its existing corporate structure sell it, they had this semi-separate business unit spend billions creating a competitive car. Okay, let's stop. Competitive in 2 senses. Competitive in the sense that finally something that actually competes on the market, and also competitive in the sense that, oh, and by the way, this competes with our own cars, the Cavalier and the Pontiac and whatever that we already sell. So let's stop right there. That might be a novel idea, right? Let's create our own spin-off company, a maverick company within our company. You could argue that it gives you an opportunity to experiment, be innovative, and sure, and oh, you know, it's like a Scrum team or whatever. It's like it's an agile, right? It was an early example of like the agile movement, right? But if you back way up, the fact that GM would do that at all is essentially a complete condemnation of themselves as a business. We're a car company and you guys want us to make a new car? Oh, we'll have to make a new car company to do that. What? have our guys do it. Are you crazy? Have you seen our guys? Yeah, not good. Basic logic could have told us all how this was going to end. And that brings our attention to this item, because this was the beginning of the end for Saturn. You see, after the original Saturn aged out of existence, GM started slapping the Saturn name on stuff that it already had lying around to fill the hole. But you have to give them a little bit of credit for this one, because unlike most of the time when GM took an existing American car and slapped a new name on it and sold them alongside each other in America, GM actually dug deep in the catalog and pulled this one out of Europe. So while yes, this is a blatant copy of an existing car, it's not a blatant copy of an existing car that already existed in America. So GM gets the "I've seen you do worse" gold star for this one. GM did not actually physically bring these from Germany, but what this is a rebadged Opel, which Opel is what the German business unit of GM is called. They brought the blueprints for this thing over here. They built them in Delaware, fitted them with plastic composite doors and front fenders rather than steel, and that is what made them officially a Saturn. It's plastic. You got to remember that. The Saturn's got to be plastic. That's part of the whole thing. And if I had two adjectives to describe this car, they would be bland and decent. I would give you a third adjectives, but I mean, instead I'll refer back to the first. You can tell all you need to know about the positioning of this product by looking up the original sales brochure. Just, if you look up that brochure, you will no longer need your Ambien prescription. You will need Zoloft first. I will say that this thing is somewhat interesting in the sense that this was the last GM Europe midsize sedan before GM merged its Europe and North America midsize sedan platform. So this is like the same size class as what would have been a Chevy Malibu or a Pontiac Grand Am over here, but it's a completely distinct car underneath. That all changed sometime after 2005 when GM streamlined and globalized their car chassis. They merged them, and so this is kind of an interesting artifact of the old pre-globalization GM business model. Speaking of the underneath, the one noteworthy thing, this is a bland car, guys. It is like Cheerios with no sugar sprinkled on them or nothing. The one noteworthy thing about this car chassis that does immediately stand out is this monolithic quasi-tubular front subframe. I've never seen anything quite that reminds me of this. It is an impressive piece, and GM North America must have thought so themselves, because this is specifically called out as a marketing feature in the original sales brochures for this car. Yeah, front subframe, right? Which those brochures correctly point out that this subframe came with 6 mounting points as opposed to the usual 4. I don't know. I mean, I noticed it. I'll say that. I will also say I was impressed with some of the driving qualities of this car. I thought it handled pretty well. I thought it rode pretty well for its size. I noticed it was very smooth on the highway. I thought that it idled smoothly at stoplights. I thought that this thing drove kind of okay, but then again, I think that might largely just be because my expectations were really low. If I drove it back to back with an 02 Accord, 02 Camry, those cars I am 100% certain would be more refined. They would outclass this thing. All I can tell you is it's not outwardly unpleasant, and I'm pretty critical, which unfortunately for them, back in 2002 when the Japanese competition was incredibly stiff, no glaring flaws was not good enough. And that was ultimately what sunk all of this. Also, the exterior styling, not the most cohesive in the beauty department there. Definitely most of this car's import competition. Like, think about a Honda Accord from this time period. Kind of a handsome car. This thing, kind of a blob. The interior overall of this car is bland and incredibly androgynous. As a car person, you can usually distinguish a car's country of origin just from like sitting on the inside. But this car just feels like it could have been from anywhere, and not even in really a good way. It's just incredibly bland. The power window switches are on the center console. That is the one kind of thing that does kind of give this thing away as a German car. I also did not find this car to be incredibly comfortable or a shining example of ergonomic perfection, at least not for me personally. I was impressed with the 4-cylinder engine, actually. It is a 2.2-liter GM Ecotec or Ecotec, whatever you want to call it, originally introduced for the year 2000. Any skepticism would be forgiven. I mean, GM 4-cylinder is not exactly like a name that stretches back in history per se, but this particular motor was kind of a rare win for GM in the 4-cylinder department. They're actually a pretty good blend of power, smoothness, fuel economy, durability. There's a dual overhead cam engine, 4 valves per cylinder, 2 balance shafts. This was kind of the first 4-cylinder that GM put out that was worth taking seriously. And I will say I think this is better, more refined, better driving characteristics, more pleasant than earlier American four cylinders, and more durable, more reliable, more long lasting than later GM four cylinders. I don't think the new ones are supposed to be any good. So, anyways, but these, the 2.2s from like the late 90s, early 2000s, this is a pretty damn good little engine, in my humble opinion. I'll be honest with you about that. And the consensus at the time when these cars were on sale was that the four cylinder was really a better buy than the optional 3-liter V6 that did exist. That 3-liter V6, it was not as reliable from what I understand. It drank a lot of gas. And frankly, this is not a big car. It's not a heavy car. And this four-cylinder has not bad power delivery. I just think this four-cylinder's power level is a good match for this car. And look at all the room in the engine bay of this thing. With the 2.2-liter, very easy car to service. Very, very easy car to get around under the engine bay. It does come with the standard GM 4-speed automatic that was in all of the GM front-wheel drive cars of this size back then, so this one happens to function well. And I do like the way that this thing, it's an artifact of 2002. This thing is willing to hold gears, willing to rev. Modern automatics, you don't get that. This feels like kind of last of the natural, very analog powertrains. Is this anything special? No, but I do at least like the way that you feel like you get an honest connection to this engine, and it's not got all of these kind of crippling fuel economy things built into it. You could also get a 5-speed manual in these cars, but only in the 4-cylinder. Overall, these Saturn L Series cars are decent, but not good enough to overcome their pointlessness, and that is the overarching theme of this car, pointless. Actually, yeah, so there's your third adjective. So what did I say earlier? Bland, decent, pointless. So yeah, Saturn, huh? I mean, they say all good things must come to an end. You could expand that, to all things must come to an end. I'm not saying anything about Saturn there. I'm just saying. But yeah, hey, don't be, what's the old saying? Don't be sad that it's over. Be sad that it happened. So yeah, that's pretty much Saturn for you.